Welcome to part 2 of our Marcos Mantula trilogy. We first covered this car. Now, stay tuned for the story of this car. So you've got a really nice distinctive Marcos Mantula. How did you come to get a second Mantula?
Well, it was very much a case of work was pretty much taking over a lot of my life. To relax, I was on the PlayStation quite a lot and to get some downtime, but that wasn't the healthiest way, and Jan told me just to get out in the garage and do something, get a bit of fresh air. And that really started things happening then. It just happened at the time there was a chassis for sale. It came with assorted Marcos bits, which were basically trying to be put together to make a classic race car for a specific race series. But the guy who had done that couldn't get the car into the correct race series because he had a Mantula chassis, but the race series he wanted, or period he wanted to get into, would have been for a wooden chassis car. Yeah. So he was up for selling the chassis. I say the body that came with it was a very early, I think V6 body,
yes, V6.
GT body, and it was pretty ropey. But obviously, if you're racing, that's something quite sacrificial, isn't it, really? So obviously it would have been done to a standard for racing as such at that point. So he wasn't really interested in having that chassis. So it was just very fortunate he'd done some of the work to make it a good chassis, but obviously when we got it, it wasn't a full Mantula set of parts. We had some much older Marcos parts with it, most of it horrendously rusty from the axles and anything that was left of suspension. And as I say, the body shell wasn't a Mantula one. We were lucky enough then to find through various contacts that there was a Mantula body shell for sale, that the chassis had basically rusted out from the car. And obviously from the first car we knew that chassis were quite prone to that, but that car, basically the owner had just thrown the chassis away and was just selling off the bits of the car that remained. So I was very lucky just to get it at the right point in time to be able to buy the whole body shell and doors, bonnet and boot from him. But that still leaves you quite short of a whole car, and that's really where we started getting into the ideas then of how to collect enough parts to get a car together again. Finding specific parts would be very difficult. But this is where, with the variety of Marcos cars made in the past, you can pick up on ideas on what you could use. And having heard about the Jaguar V12 car, which must have used a V12, the IRS Jaguar axle, I thought, it's a good place to start. You could get them quite cheaply. So that's where I started with the car. So it's quite straightforward bolting it into the Marcos chassis. The space seemed to accommodate the chassis, accommodate the axle very well, and that's really where the idea came from. We were originally going to make another mad looking Marcos car similar to what the blue one was, but once we'd done that axle and I'd started to make a rolling chassis, that larger Jaguar wheel at the back just had that look of a classic 60s GT car, and that really was then what cemented the idea to really move forward with the car. From there it was then a case of getting everything else. I didn't have an interior, I didn't have any steering components or anything. So I went online for searching for sourcing certain parts with the idea that a Rover V8 was going to go in the car. Basically, I thought that the quality of suspension parts you could get at that point in time, the car should have Triumph GT6 front suspension. Put it with the power of a Rover V8, I thought that was a bit of a crazy idea, and also I would want much bigger brakes to obviously cope as well with more modern traffic and to cope with the power of a V8 engine. So that's really where we started from. Well, I happened upon a website which was for Lotuses, and the company was called Spider Engineering. They remanufactured parts for Lotuses, new chassis, and they did major upgrades as well. They put modern engines in, the Ford C-Tech, I think. I don't know about if it was the Duratec as well, but that kind of obviously, you know, gave a bit of a few other ideas, shall we say. But they did a complete front end suspension kit with wishbones, so tubular wishbones, and also different uprights, so you could have a complete Ford Platinum front end, and then you could have the brake options that were available to Ford and Ford upgrades. So basic Ford four stud bolt pattern, and then you could have bigger brakes as well. And this is what really sold it to me, the fact that you could get those bigger brakes and get a good vented disc, 280mm vented disc on the front as well. And that's really what then, that seemed a very good idea to go forward with the car, really. The whole point to doing a lot of this work was as well because the steering is very heavy in the blue car. It's got all its geometry is very much set up for high speed and a certain purpose, if you like. The wishbones are very extended. Spider Engineering, when we actually asked the question, could actually do longer wishbones. And if you look at a normal Marcos, the early Marqueses, the front wheels are quite inset. So we asked if they could do a plus 30mm wishbone, which they could quite happily. So that's the way we went. And that just sets the front wheels out just slightly wider then, which more aligns the track width to the rear end of the car as well. So I thought that would be a better balance to the car. And also with the thought that I wanted Jan to be able to drive the car and be able to turn the steering, because of course it's not power steering, there's nothing power assisted in the car at all. You haven't even got servo assisted brakes. So all of this is trying to make the car as practical as possible so that Jan could drive it. And saying that we didn't have the interior. So that was a case of trying to find a seating arrangement that would be comfortable for both of us to use as well. So we haven't got standard Marcos seats in there. We haven't got any of the original interior, apart from we had an original dash top panel, and that was it. So I basically made up all the interior, if you like. We luckily had with the first car, with the chassis that we got, because it was going to be a racer, we had a roll cage, so we thought we'll use that. It's quite strange. I've now found the history of the car. When it was originally sold from the factory, it was supplied with a roll bar. it just seems strange that through
it wanted a roll bar.
It wanted a roll bar, yes.
Yeah.
Not knowing at the time anything about the previous history, I've only recently just actually tracked that down from the company that now holds the documents.
And where did you source the engine? Because you stuck with the Rover V8 for this one?
Yes, that was another case of using the evil empire online, and found an engine, and it was from a TVR Griffith, I believe, 430.
Oh, that's the sweet one. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It appealed, shall we say, on a number of points.
Yeah.
Not in the least 280 horsepower and a lot of torque.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to think how quite it worked at the time, because I think as well the guy was going to use the engine for an off-road racer. But I think things were changing in the off-road racing world at the time to use slightly different engines, and so they were coming. Yeah, they were coming away from the Rovers. But again, on that well-known site, I managed to find a T5 gearbox from a TVR Chimera, I think. The T5 box, I think, was used for, again, when they went to the 5-litre Rover V8 engines for the power and torque, they wanted that stronger box because they were just munching the LT77s. So it just fell into place, and yeah, we went off round Wales to get the engine, and I can't remember where we got the gearbox, but
the far side of Thetford. We were closer to Holland than we were to us by that stage.
So the whole car's been an adventure.
Yes, it gets you out there and gets you the experiences. I mean, I tried at the time. I went to I found from one of the car shows we went to a vendor that was prepared to make up a wiring loom, which was basically, they did kits for Caterham model cars, but they also were very much into the Volkswagens at the time. And I asked if they would be prepared to do me a wiring loom, which they did, and that's how we solved the wiring problem with it. And so I needed help on that on the first car, if you like, with the wiring side of it. But we got it together, and I think it took 3 years from getting the chassis to having a car MOT'd on the road, which is pretty good. And it's just a case of just always doing a bit, planning the next bit, getting the next bit ready, and just always just doing something when you have a bit of time. It's very useful having the garage attached to the house. You can just literally just drop in when you need to and just pick up the tools and just do something, or investigate, or measure, and get the next bit prepared or ready, or and just keeping the project going. When we got the car together, we obviously really started campaigning it then, and wanted to take it out to a lot of events, and also introduce it to the club, if you like. And the clubs at the time, well, they hadn't seen a Marcos like this one before, and particularly having the wheel combination we've got on the car. A standard car should have, I think, maximum 14-inch wheels. We went for 17-inch. And when the car turned up at the first club event and they saw the spinners on the wheels, oh, what have you done? Boudicca's chariot,
Yes.
So all sorts of comments. I think they've got used to us now, if you like, as a club. Yeah. But for me, one of the things that was quite amazing with this car was, one year we decided to go to Brooklands for the supercar day at Brooklands, and we took the car up the test hill and basically really enjoyed the event. Only to see that the next year, when we were looking at where to go, on the website for the Brooklands 2014 event, they actually used a picture of that car to advertise the event on the website. Alongside, well, they had a rear view of us and the front end of a Lamborghini Aventador. Now, for a car that I put together in the garage, I thought that's quite some recognition. So very, very proud of that time.